Good evening, America. I'm Chester Holden, host of the National Evening News, presenting you with a special live broadcast of a congressional hearing today. The newest witness, a 19-year-old college sophomore named Francois Corpel, is about to start his testimony regarding the 3D printer control bill. We go now to a live look-in. Will the witness please state his name and occupation? Francois Corpel. I am a student at Purdue University studying industrial engineering. Based on my previous and future classes and career options, I have worked with 3D printers for 5 years and look to continue working with them in the workforce, making me very knowledgeable about their capabilities. You may begin with your testimony. Thank you, Senators Sandler, McDonald, Schooner, and all the men and women of the Congress who are here today for giving me the opportunity to speak on what I view as a very important issue, the safety of American citizens. Tonight, I'm going to argue for the regulations regarding renewable licenses and background checks for anyone wishing to use a 3D printer. While this technology was not designed with the intent of violence, it is more than capable of creating functional weapons. Additionally, with the expansion of knowledge and application of this technology, this threat can become more and more deadly in the very near future. I would like to get out ahead of this threat by restricting who is able to use this technology, especially with regards to their intentions. 3D printing is, for most law students and practicing lawyers, a technology with which they have little or no experience. While I do not wish to speak for you, Senators, I would like to ask whether this is the case for you. Well, I've not used a 3D printer. Neither have I, but they do look very interesting. And I was shown how to use one by some high school students I visited, but otherwise I have not used one on my own. So you can all agree that this is new and unfamiliar territory when discussing the legislation of this technology? Yes. Yes, I would agree with that. Great. Due to this lack of experience, I feel it only logical that lawmakers such as yourselves will require more information than usual from outside sources to keep you informed of their capabilities, hence my willingness to testify. I will continue that since this technology is so new, some may feel it would be beneficial to wait and see how this technology develops before any legislation is confirmed. While I do agree that legislation will not be nearly perfect enough without fully understanding the technology, I would rather prepare for the worst case by requiring licenses and background checks to own and operate 3D printers, and then we can scale back the legislation if necessary. Now, Mr. Corpel, while I take your point seriously, I am concerned with my constituents' rights. You shouldn't have to take away 3D printers for everyone, especially those who are using them responsibly. I understand your concern, Mr. McDonald. That is why we are not calling for a complete ban of 3D printers with this bill. We are simply calling for legislation, such as background checks and licenses, that will help make sure that people are using this technology responsibly. There is a lack of legislation for 3D printing, and that such an oversight could prove dangerous. This is important because there could be American lives at stake if this issue is not taken seriously enough. I do concede that no known tragedies have been caused by 3D printing and that the current legislation seems to be holding steady. However, over legislation, to an extent, is safer than under legislation. With any new technology comes new responsibility. It would follow, then, that the invention of the 3D printer would come with 3D printing legislation, which is what we are here to talk about today. From Invisalign to Airbus and even NASA, 3D printing has a following across all industries. This, coupled with increased desktop use, suggests that 3D printing is going to be a staple in many Americans' lives. There is substantial concern for the security of the storage, transfer, and execution of 3D models across digital networks and systems. This concern is due to the many access points to disrupt a 3D printing system. This poses a threat to manufacturing processes, government projects, and much more. Regardless of your opinion on the danger of 3D printing weapons, operation licenses and background checks for 3D printers will also help slow other threats to this technology by dissuading and or stopping those who used to wish them with malintent. Now, this may be a concern, Mr. Corpel, but is there any merit behind it? Thank you, Senator McDonald. I was just about to get to that point. I do not personally believe that the security risks from 3D printers are vastly different from that of 2D or regular printers. These technologies have similar access points, such as the queue, transfer process, online storage, the printer itself, among others. Each one of these access points can be compromised. While a 2D printed sabotage is usually just annoying as it only presents a simple error that can be fixed with a reprint, 3D printed sabotage may be direr. If a 3D printed part is compromised, different processes and objects may become dysfunctional, leading to poor products, slower production times, and in the worst cases, total failure and death. No matter what your stance on gun control is, and subsequently 3D printed gun control, this is another valid reason to regulate 3D printing technology. While I believe that the more pressing issue with 3D printers is their ability to produce weapons, there are other problems, such as industrial attack, that call for regulation of this technology. If businesses cannot provide what their customers ask, then our nation's economy is in danger. Without properly functioning businesses, we cannot expect to be as developed and free of a nation as we are. Thank you, Senator Sandler. I will agree on that, But Mr. Coppell, you have said that you are concerned with 3D printers printing weapons. Surely this must be a difficult task, even for an experienced user. Once again, Mr. McDonald, you have led me to my next point. A 3D printed gun was successfully fired in 2013. 15 out of the 16 required parts to the gun were manufactured in the home of Mr. Cody Wilson, an average American citizen, with a 3D printer. The only non-printed part was a metallic nail that can be found at any hardware store that was used as the firing pin. Well, Mr. Coppell, this seems to be an isolated incident. Surely someone may be able to design and print a gun with this technology, but I would contend that many people would not know how to design something so intricate. I agree, Senator Schooner. The attention to detail required in order to design a weapon is not of common knowledge. However, the blueprints to Mr. Wilson's gun were made available for free online, and though they were taken down within only a few days, they were downloaded nearly 100,000 times. This means that anyone who has access to a 3D printer and plastic can print guns. Specifically, current efforts to curtail the supply side of weapons will be undermined if consumers can simply print out whatever components they need via a 3D printer. With this capability, someone can print a plastic gun that is undetectable with a metal detector. Now, Mr. Coppell, are the bullets 3D printed as well? No, Mr. Sandler, they are not. These are regular metallic bullets that can be fired out of regular guns. However, not all public spaces have metal detectors, and even if they did, the possibility exists that high heat-resistant plastic bullets could be produced in the future. It is just that this plastic currently does not exist. So, is this gun necessarily an issue, Mr. Coppell, or is it more of a toy? Senator Schooner, I would like to bring up the fact that the Austrian Interior Ministry concluded after thorough testing that the gun could be lethal. I do wish to concede that the current threats of 3D printing weapons are currently covered by the legislation we have in place, such as the Arms Trade Treaty. Well then, if our current laws cover this issue, why are we making new laws? Because, Senator McDonald, new developments are going to happen with this technology, and I would rather get out ahead of a tragedy by enforcing these background checks and licenses than react to a tragedy. It is not only theoretically possible to 3D print a weapon, but it has happened with success. While 3D printers were created with positive intentions, they are capable of creating terrible things, and as such, we need to restrict who will have access to them. Given the fact that 3D printers can generate weapons, this topic greatly relates to the gun control debate. Not everyone shares my opinion that guns are in general not safe and should be left out of the house. Many prominent figures contend that handgun controls would give the police and military a monopoly on arms, deprive minority groups of a needed means of protection, and fail to reduce violent crime. Specifically, those people feel that others would be in danger without a weapon to protect themselves. Further, they argue that many malevolent Americans may ignore gun control laws and find ways around them to get guns. Thus, they believe that the laws are in essence useless and are not worth the forfeiture of the right to own guns, and subsequently 3D printers. If people believe this was true about traditional gun control laws, what is going to stop them from feeling the same way about 3D printed control laws? Once again, though, I would like to turn the tables on the issue and posit that these civil liberties that they are fighting for are not worth American lives. If we are to just not regulate 3D printed weapons, then criminals will have an easier means of committing their crimes. While it is true that some will find ways around the laws, some potential criminals may become deterred by the legislation, and I would rather stop a portion of attacks than rather stop none of them. Now, I have heard that Switzerland has a negligible firearms violence rate without much regulation despite its high ranking of gun possession. Why should America adopt such gun control and 3D printing control legislation when they're not needed in another country? While this is true, Senator McDonald, it is also important to point out that this is an isolated occurrence that is not in our country. We live in America, which has a completely different population than that of Switzerland. What may work in one country will not likely work in ours. Since there has been already sizable threats from gun violence in the past and the ability to print 3D print weapons, this threat is more likely to resurface than ever. I wanted to bring this point to you because there is a sizable population who may not believe in the effectiveness of gun control. They are armed with valid facts and opinions that cannot be overlooked. I am merely trying to give those people my opinion, and I hope that I can help them understand my concerns with 3D printing, and hopefully convince them and you all to see the benefits of this bill so it can get passed as soon as possible. While I do believe it is possible to go too far with gun control and consequently 3D printer control, I would rather go too far with the intention of saving lives and then have to scale back the regulation instead of going not far enough and having to increase legislation due to the loss of life. Still, there are others that have legitimate concerns over the effectiveness of current gun control. Their main argument is that lawmakers often either misclassify or misidentify the threat when they are creating legislation, and thus the criminals are free to bypass the laws. For example, the term assault weapon is a propagandistic with no specific technical definition in firearms reference works. Its precise meaning is vague, but used by advocates and journalists, it appears to primarily refer to semi-automatic firearms, and sometimes more specifically to those that are military style. That is, that bear resemblance cosmetically to military firearms. Well, Mr. Corpel, I don't see what's wrong with banning assault weapons. If we could stop people from printing these assault weapons, would that be enough? Senator Schooner, I would like to ask you what specifically is an assault weapon in your mind. Well, it wouldn't be all guns, just the ones that are more dangerous than others. Yes, but I would like to ask how specifically are they more dangerous? I'm not faulting you for not knowing because there is no formal definition for assault weapons, which may make it easier for criminals to circumvent the current laws. To be fair, this term was created by mainstream media to generate a certain feeling to their stories. It is easy to hear a term and start using it with minimal understanding what it means. The danger comes with a lack of description that the term actually provides. That being said, there is still danger with over-description. Blocking just one source of guns would usually not prevent a criminal from getting a gun. However, the people with this viewpoint seem to rid the regulations as their wish altogether, since criminals will likely find a way around the law. I see things on the other side of the spectrum. While some people may do anything in their power to see their malicious plans through, others will be deterred by the laws. And I believe that stopping some tragedy is at least better than letting tragedy become the norm. I understand that this is hard to prove, given that those who are deterred by the laws rarely come out and say as such, thus making it increasingly difficult to know how effective the laws truly are. But nonetheless, I feel that gun control is effective in relating gun-related violence. Building off of that, I feel that regulating 3D printers would help increase the effectiveness of current gun control laws to help decrease this type of violence. Despite the differences between me and those who oppose gun control laws, I agree with them in the sense that laws often miss the mark in their verbiage and can allow naysayers to debate whether the new implementations will truly be effective or not. This is important to know when making 3D printed laws so that they will effectively work. Now, I understand that most of this testimony to this point has been my opinion, but I would like to present the findings of a study conducted on the effectiveness of stricter gun control laws. According to a study by Dr. Kwan and Dr. Bach, both professors of Decision Sciences and Management Information System at the John Cook School of Business, states with more extensive gun control laws, such as background checks and licenses, experience on average almost 3.5 fewer firearms deaths per 100,000 inhabitants than their counterparts with a p-value of less than 0.01. This p-value is a test of validity of source for any statistical analysis. Any p-value less than 0.05, which is a standard baseline for testing across all statistical tests, is deemed statistically significant for the following reason. The p-value represents the percent chance as a decimal that the results gained from the analysis were due to chance alone. Therefore, this study's findings have less than a 1% chance of the results being due to chance alone. Thus, these findings are statistically significant and are a very powerful resource. So, what you're saying, Mr. Corpel, is this is proof that tougher gun control is having a more positive effect in terms of saving lives and proves your point that the 3D printing licenses and background checks will be effective. As much as I would like this to be, Mr. Schooner, this is not quite true. P-value is reassuring, saying that this is very close to proof, though there is a slight chance that these numbers do not mean anything relevant. Additionally, there are some potential pitfalls within this article that are not directly addressed when giving the final results. The analysis covered 12 states per end of the spectrum, that is, the 12 strictest states and the 12 least strict states with concern to gun control. All in all, this number totals 24 states. While this is a large number of test subjects, it may not be enough to offset the potential biases. According to the central limit theorem, any sample size less than 30 is more likely to be affected by bias due to its small size. Larger sample sizes are more likely to follow a normal distribution curve and therefore less likely to succumb to bias. The opposite can be said as well, which is why it is important to take these results with a grain of salt. So, Mr. Corpel, are you now saying that this study is not valid? I'm not saying this either, Mr. McDonald. I am saying that the statistical analysis given by Drs. Kwan and Bach provides compelling, albeit not conclusive, statistical evidence that harsher gun control laws decrease the number of firearm-related deaths by 3.5 per 100,000 people. Well, that does sound very nice, Mr. Corpel, but it doesn't seem like a lot of people being saved. Senator Sandler, if you expand these numbers out, it becomes more compelling. The current U.S. population is around 330 million people. If 3.5 out of every 100,000 people is saved by harsher gun control, this means 11,550 people will be saved every year. While this is small compared to the entire population, this number is large in its potential. While these past 3 points that I've made have referred solely to gun legislation, I would like to remind you that there is currently no legislation on 3D printers, which can be used to print lethal guns. I believe because of this, 3D printer legislation should fall into the category of gun legislation as well, meaning our legislation is missing a key sector in gun control by not also regulating 3D printers. To finish up my testimony, additive manufacturing, otherwise known as 3D printing, is likely to upend the last 2 centuries of approaches to design and manufacturing with profound implications. 3D printing is an extraordinary new technology that will revolutionize so many different industries. Although for all of the positive aspects, there are some potentially negative aspects to come from this new technology as well. Some may pose that there are no immediate threats to 3D printing. However, as shown by this testimony, there are indeed lethal weapons that have been successfully designed and printed within the United States. 3D printing is difficult to regulate as it can be used in consumers' homes as well as businesses. That being said, it is still possible and important to regulate if we treat these carefully like we treat weapons. I bring you all back to this point because despite all of the negative aspects I've discussed today, there are still many positive aspects to 3D printing. Thus, I do not want to entirely ban 3D printing. I still maintain, though, that the dangers of 3D printing are real and present. Furthermore, these dangers are concerning enough to act by regulating its usage. From the first day I had heard of 3D printing, I realized it would produce a net benefit to society. It is such a revolutionary technology and deserves to be preserved for the advancement of our knowledge as a society. But if we do not play carefully with our new toy, we may end up with a lot of avoidable tragedy. Senators and representatives of this committee, I thank you for your time and for the opportunity once again to speak on this issue. Such a touching testimony by an educated young man. I'm Chester Holden, and we will be back with more of this congressional hearing right after this commercial break.